All right, now we're going to take a look at our last example, example number 3. Now notice with this example, we're given a little bit more or a lot more information. So that's going to allow us to find a phase shift. So something to keep in mind. So it says the average monthly temperatures for the city of Seattle are given below. So you can read those numbers on the table. So the first question it's asking is, what is the amplitude? What would be the amplitude of this function? Well, let's look for our maximum value. So if we go through and look for our maximum value is right here in August, which is 66 degrees. Then if we look for our minimum is down here in January, which is 41. Well, remember, to find my amplitude, I'm simply going to take 66 minus 41 and divide it by 2. So I'm going to get 25 over 2, or my amplitude is 12.5 degrees. Now, using the given information, now it's asking you to find the vertical shift. Well, remember, my vertical shift still involves my min and max. So my max is still 66. My minimum is still 41. Well, to find my vertical shift, I'm simply going to take those two values, add them together, and divide by 2. So I'm going to get 107 divided by 2, which ends up being 53.5 degrees. So my vertical shift, or my K value, is going to be 53.5. Now, what is the period? Well, notice it goes January through December. So how many months is that? Well, that's 12 months in a year. So the period is going to be 12 months. All right, so now it's asking us to write a function. So we get to choose whether it's sine or cosine. I'm going to choose cosine. Notice in January it starts down at 41 and then it increases and then goes back down to 42. So that tells me my A value is going to be negative. Well, what is my A value? Well, if I look up here in part A, my A value is 12.5. So I'm going to say y equals 12.5. Now, does that need to be positive or negative? Well, it's starting at my minimum, so it needs to be negative. Cosine. Well, B comes from the period. So I'm going to do some work off to the side. What was the period? The period was 12. So I'm going to set 12 equal to 2 pi over B. I cross multiply, get 12B equals 2 pi. So I'm going to get B to be 2 pi over 12, which reduces down to pi over 6. So I'm going to get that to be pi over 6. T plus C, we have enough information now to find C, so I'm going to leave it alone and just write C. And then my vertical shift was 53.5, so plus 53.5. Now, how are we going to find that C value? Well, I'm going to go off to the side here. It says that using T1 to represent January. So what was the temperature in January? Well, the temperature in January was 41 degrees. So I'm going to work backwards to find my C value. So over here, it says 41 degrees was in January equals negative 12.5 cosine pi over 6 was my B. My T is a 1 because it was in January. It said T equaled 1 for January, plus C, and then plus my 53.5. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract that 53.5 on both sides. So I'm going to get negative 12.5 equals negative 12.5 cosine. Pi over 6 times 1 is just going to be pi over 6 plus c. Well, now I need to get rid of that negative 12.5, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 12.5. The negatives cancel out, the 12.5s cancel out, and I'm just left with the 1. Now I want to get this, what does this angle equal? Well, if I want to find out what this angle equals, I'm going to use the inverse cosine. So I'm going to say second cosine of 1 equals my angle, which is pi over 6 plus c. Now to get your final answer, I'm just going to say the inverse, or second cosine of 1 minus pi over 6 is going to give me c. Now if you enter that in your calculator right there, you're going to get c to be approximately 0.5. So now I can go over here and plug that into my formula, or function, sorry. So your final answer would be negative 12.5 cosine pi over 6t. It's negative c, so it's going to be negative 0.05 plus 53.5. So this would be your final answer. Now the last one is simply you're taking, it says part E is saying according to your model, what is the average monthly temperature in February? Well, what does T equal in February? It's the second month, so that would mean T equals 2. So if I just replace T with 2 in part D, so I'm going to say Y equals negative 12.5 cosine pi over 6 times 2 minus 0.5 plus 53.5. So again, you can enter that in your calculator. If you want to kind of do one step in your head, you can say, okay, 2 times pi over 6 is going to be pi over 3. So it's a little bit easier to type in your calculator. You can type that in your calculator and you would get approximately 42.8 degrees. So if you compare that to the actual value, so we got 42.8, February is 44, so it's relatively close to the actual average. It's off by a little bit more than a degree. I'm going to have you try to solve some of these problems on your own, and on Thursday when we come back, we'll take a look, answer any questions you may have, and maybe go through a couple more examples as well.